right? And we must expect that because there's so many other versions and so many people use other versions, that there will be a constant questioning and constant attacks on where we stand. And we need to understand not only that we are right, but why we are right. And it's important to understand that we are right, but it's equally important that we understand why we are right. Many arguments will be put against our position on the scriptures, but we can be absolutely confident that we not only have an answer for all the arguments that come up, but we have an answer that's overwhelmingly sufficient to silence the argument. We need to know our own case and be able to present it. Now, we need to be able to present it as a defence of what we believe, but we need to be able to present it not defensively. And that's where often we make our mistake. In our defence, we become so defensive that in fact we become offensive. And we've got to learn not to do that. If we really know why we hold the position we do, and this is very important, we will be confident of that position and we'll be able to defend it without heat or anger or loud voice. In other words, without losing our temper, without shouting. Now, expect for people to shout at you, but don't shout that back. Be able to keep you cool. And the only way to do that is to understand why we believe what we believe and to be absolutely sure that our position can be defended without us having to resort to anger or heat or shouting or any of those things. One of the things that we've got to understand is that this debate about the scriptures, now it's not really about the King James, though that's how it's presented to us all the time. It's really about the Greek and the Hebrew texts behind the new versions and behind the King James. And this argument's been going on for a long time, since in the 1880s. So well over 100 years it's been going on. And so both sides have developed their arguments and means of putting that argument across. And so be prepared in this matter to be called simplistic, right? Now this is the basic argument used by so-called scholars against anyone who puts a simple, logical argument that they can't answer. Now many times people have said to me, oh, that's simplistic, right? Because it was simple. And most of this argument is simple. Then, of course, I've been called amusingly uninformed. Now, this is another put down by scholars to avoid a discussion on the Greek or Hebrew text. It gives them the opportunity to avoid the embarrassment of being exposed by their own ignorance. The sort of people who tell you that what you are is amusingly uninformed are people who have a very superior attitude and consider themselves to be scholars. Now, most of them are not nearly as well informed as they would have you believe. And by the time we finish these lectures, if you've understood everything that we learn, you won't be uninformed. You might be amusing, but you won't be uninformed. And then it will be said that we are unloving. And this simply means that they have no argument, but they won't agree with you whatever you say, so you are in the wrong. And we must just accept that that's people that say that sort of thing, that's their cop-out, that's the way they do it. And then we'll be said to be dogmatic. And this means that they know you've won the debate and they don't like it. When you say something and they've got no answer, They say, oh, you're just dogmatic. And then they'll say that we're legalistic. And this actually means that they don't like what the Bible says, even though they admit that it says it. Right? They understand that what we're saying is right. They understand that what the Bible says is right, but they don't like it. And then we'll be accused of being divisive. And this simply means that you don't agree with me. In other words, because you don't agree with them, you are in the wrong. Now, the great need for us is to not be naive. Now, I don't know whether you understand what naivety really is, but it's the scourge of modern day Christianity, and particularly of people who think of themselves as fundamentalists. They are so gullible, they are easily conned, and indeed business knows this, and the world knows that this is so. And the only people who don't understand how naive fundamentalists are is the fundamentalists themselves. Right, we need to think. We need to listen to what's said when people talk to us about this issue, and we need to evaluate what they're actually saying. We need to listen carefully to what they're saying and evaluate what they're saying. We need to understand what's being implied by what's said. Now, very often what's said isn't what's meant. Right? It's they imply different things, and we take it up not really having thought it through and not really understanding it. We need to see when we're being conned, because most of the time the arguments that are used against us are not legitimate arguments. Most of the time the arguments that are used against the King James are not legitimate arguments. Right? We need to see through the argument being presented to the real issue and concentrate on that. And we'll get to understand what the real issue is as time goes on. Now, once we have gained a clear and confident understanding of our position on the Bible and feel we can defend it confidently, we then need to understand this matter as having been dealt with and go on from there and preach it. We need to not get into endless arguments about the versions. Most people will just argue around in a circle about the versions, and they'll deliberately do that until we give up. Now, we need to not get into those endless arguments. As we look at it, we are going to look at it a different way, and a way that cannot be taken round in a circle, a way that looks at the questions fairly and squarely, looks at the things that are said about the King James, looks at the different texts, and gives us a clear understanding of what we believe and why we believe it. And when we're finished, we'll have a good argument or a good understanding of why we believe what we believe, and then we don't need to argue endlessly with people who are not going to be convinced, who are not going to be convicted, and who are not going to change the version that they're using. When they are really genuinely interested, then we can take it up and discuss it with them. If they're really genuinely interested, they will be, first of all, convinced, and then they'll be convicted. And if God works in their hearts, they will use the King James. If God doesn't work in their hearts, nothing will change what they do or what they believe. And so we need to understand that we can't argue them around to our point of view, because we got there simply by God convicting